whether you have any right now or not, what's something that you think they should know about Grandpa Earl, or about your dad that they may or may not know?
And the sky's the limit. You go first.
You're the oldest.
You're the patriarch.
Well, I'm speechless.
No.
For a change.
Mother.
I don't know. I really don't know a lot of stories. I will say this: the story that has stuck by me for years is when he was in New Guinea doing missionary work. He went back into the Jimmy Valley. It had opened to the white man 6 weeks before, and he was I don't know if he's laying out airstrip or what, but he was doing missionary work there, and he was tired and hot and sweaty, and so he had his shoes or boots on, and he took them off and he sat by a cool mountain stream, and he didn't think there was anybody around him, and he heard clicking sounds and grunts, and he turned around and there was a dark complected native with hardly any clothes on, but clothed well enough for a native New Guinean, and he was intrigued by Dad's white feet, and that story has always stuck by me.
How beautiful upon the mountain are the feet of those who bring the gospel.
He would quote that verse of scripture.
Yeah.
I heard him speak in one of my churches, and he used that scripture verse and told that story.
Yeah.
And
cried as he was telling.
And cried while he was telling it. Yeah.
Good story.
One thing about my dad that is different than me, Dad was always very tender. I can remember as a little boy going to the First Pilgrim Holiness Church in Richmond on a Sunday morning, and they asked him to testify, and he got up and testified, and then he got up and sang a song, "What a Friend We Had in Heaven, Jesus," and tears were rolling down his cheeks, and he was so very tender. I spent 43 years as a pastor, and I've served a lot as an evangelist, but I never preached much with tears. But
when he did, he needed a bath towel.
But my dad would always preach with tears.
Mm-hmm.
My methods were different than his, but I'm a different individual.
Dad always took 4 or 5 handkerchiefs with him to church.
Yeah.
Had one in every pocket, huh?
He was a good man.
So tell me about I've heard lots of stories about some of the houses that you all lived in Richmond, and I don't know if you necessarily lived at like the Kwanzaa hut that was in the backyard, and
that was
auntie-
in Boston.
That was in Boston. Oh,
We didn't live. Our uncle.
you guys live, yeah.
Uncle Jim and his family lived. Daddy was always taking care of his younger siblings, and Jim and his family.
See, Grandpa Robert had a stroke when he was 48, Robert Lewis, and he died when he was 60. And Dad was the eldest of 7 brothers, one who had already died. But when Grandpa got so sick, he couldn't take care. It was Dad's responsibility to take care of the family. And that was an awful lot of responsibility. And then he was married to his sweetheart, who was Anna, who was Jim's mother, and she died when she's 23, wasn't it?
Right.
And so, I mean, there was tremendous grief and trauma that Dad had lived through. And so when Marlene says he was always taken care of, well, that's true. He was, he had a large extended family from when he was very, very young.
Right. Grandpa and Grandma Adams lived in a little house behind where Mendel and Marlene kind of grew up on the west side of Richmond. I can remember as a young kid riding my bicycle over there because I knew my dad was building this house for them to live in, and I would just play around and visit him, and then I'd ride my bicycle back home. I was raised by foster parents, Bill and Martha Solomon, and but I spent time summers with Mendel and Marlene when they were little, and in Indianapolis and different places. But when they lived in Richmond, we'd see each other quite a bit and be together. I'd ride my bike over to their place, and
Now, your foster mother name, was she known as Mott? Is that right?
yeah, her nickname was, her full name was Martha Emma Hoover, was her maiden name, and she married William Solomon when she was 17 and he was 19, and they had no children of their own, and so my mother, Anna, Dad's first wife, had tuberculosis, and so she couldn't raise me, and I was passed around to different homes to take care of after I was born. And one of the last homes I lived in was a couple in the First Pilgrim Homes Church in Richmond by the name of Yost.
Oh, really?
I didn't know that.
The Yost took care of me, and their daughter
Really?
used to embarrass me when I was a young kid growing up. She always pointed her finger at me when she'd see me, and she'd say, "Jimmy, I used to nurse you when you were a baby." And of course, she meant she babysitted me, but but it didn't sound that way, and it always embarrassed
Well,
me.
Leona was mentally retarded, wasn't
I know
she?
she was.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so she-
yeah.
yeah.
But the Yost couple took care of me, and my dad Solomon, I call two men dad. It's natural for me.
Sure.
When he came home from Belden, where he was a tool and die maker, one day, he found his wife Martha crying, and he asked her what she was crying about, and she said, "I want to go get that baby," and so he said, "Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go get him, but we're only going to keep him 6 weeks, because this was during the Great Depression, and people were struggling to live, have enough food on the table to feed them, and he felt he'd do his responsibility taking care of me for 6 weeks. I was 8 months old at the time, and but I cooed and smiled at him, and I stayed with
That's
him
how you got Maryland too,
I
wasn't
stayed
it?
with him I stayed with him for 18 and a half years until I married Marilyn.
So you never even lived with your
No,
dad?
I never lived with my mother and dad.
Did she have tuberculosis when she was pregnant with you?
So far as I know, she did.
Interesting.
And they
In
didn't
that
have
box,
penicillin, they didn't have anything.
in the box over beside you, there's an old paper sack with some letters that my mother wrote to her mother back in 1931 and 32. She was in a sanitarium in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and those were hard times. Dad couldn't didn't have the money to drive up to see her very often, and she would make comments about how she longed to see her husband and her baby, and I those letters were given to me by my uncle Richard White just before he died. Why he didn't give them to me years before, I don't know, but I've always loved my brother and my sister, Mendel and Marlene, and we always had good times together when we were kids. And I can remember when I'd go stay for a week or two at Indianapolis, and when I'd leave, the Solomons would come and get me, and Mendel and Marlene would cry. They were just little kids because I was leaving, but always made me feel good.
Made you feel good because you felt bad.
Right.
Did you think it was strange that after your dad remarried that you didn't go back and live with them, or is it the Solomons were your parents? And
when I was pastoring in Iowa, Dad and Mother Margaret, I'll say her name because you don't get confused of who I'm talking about, but they brought Grandma Adams out to Clarinda, Iowa to see Marilyn, me, and the new little baby Bobby that was born. And
I was 12 years
And
old.
Bobby over there.
and Marilyn, and when after it was over with, we were in the car together. Marilyn and Mother was in the back seat with Grandma Adams, and Dad and I were in the front seat, and he started talking to me about why he didn't take me when I was a youngster, and he said that he decided he would break his heart rather than breaking three hearts of Bill and Martha Solomon and myself, because I didn't remember when they took me.
Sure.
And they were my parents, and yet my dad was my dad. I always look forward to these visits and when I could be near him and be around him.
Was there ever an official adoption, or was it just an understanding?
No, they never adopted me. No. And it's to be expected because my father was still living, and I retained my name, and I've had a good life, but as I've gotten older, my thoughts have gone back to my mother a lot. In the last 2 years, I've done more thinking about her, and just recently, Marilyn and I made a trip to Richmond, though we both didn't feel like driving down there, but we did anyway. And the basic reason I wanted to go, I wanted to put some flowers on my mother's grave because there's nobody left to decorate her grave, and I hadn't decorated it in a lot of years, so I took some flowers and put on her grave and breathed a quick prayer and left. I don't remember much at all about my mother at all.
You were 4 years of age when she died, weren't you?
On the very day I was 4.
Yeah.
Oh.
Lord
She
have
died
mercy.
on my birthday.
Yeah.
You better take a drink of water.
So, Aunt Marlene, you were telling me about you used to idolize Uncle Jim. You look up to him, right?
Yeah. He's my big brother. And,
I'm your old brother.
and he never wanted us to, I mean, if I said he was our half brother, he didn't like that. He would always say, no, I'm your brother.
Right.
There's anything like a half-ass brother. That's my
But
You're a full ass brother, Dad.